glass of water there.
Just have a little reminder. Great. On y va? Okay. Good morning. Bonjour. Ma présentation va être en anglais, mais on est heureux de prendre des questions si vous voulez. My name is Shawn-Patrick Stensil. I am a senior energy analyst with Greenpeace Canada. I'm joined today by Theresa McClenaghan, the executive director of the Canadian Environmental Law Association, and Dr. Gordon Edwards, the president of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. Our organizations, along with the Sierra Club of Canada, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, Northwatch, New Clear Free Solutions, filed a procedural request today with Canada's so-called nuclear watchdog. We've asked the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission to publish a study that was suppressed by their staff, revealing risks and weaknesses in off-site emergency plans at the Darlington nuclear station. We feel the CNSC has betrayed the public trust by concealing this study, revealing risks to the City of Toronto. We've asked for this study to be released before fall, when there will be important hearings on the future of the Darlington nuclear station. Having this study will allow the public, the Commission, and governments to understand the public safety hazards posed by the Darlington nuclear station transparently and allow for appropriate emergency plans to be put in place. The aging Darlington nuclear station sits 60 kilometers from downtown Toronto and millions of people. Ontario Power Generation is asking at hearings that start today to rebuild the station so it can operate it for decades more. This will cost over $10 billion. The CNSC is holding the first of two hearings today on OPG's proposal. But before the CNSC gives OPG any approval, Torontonians deserve a transparent and evidence-based discussion on the adequacy of off-site emergency plans in the event of a major accident at the Darlington nuclear station. Following the Fukushima disaster, hundreds of citizens and environmental organizations called on the CNSC to provide evidence and data on the adequacy of off-site emergency response plans. Citizens pointed out that there has never been an assessment of the ability of emergency response in Canada to deal with a Fukushima-scale accident. They said this lack of analysis and evidence puts us at risk. In response to this public pressure, the CNSC said they would produce such a study before the hearings that start today. And in 2014, they released a report and claimed it responded to public concern. But this study had a curious conclusion. It said a severe nuclear accident would have a limited effect on the greater Toronto area. The public study, however, was designed to mislead. Through access to information, we've learned that the public study is profoundly different from the original study. When the original report did look at a Fukushima-scale accident, as was demanded by the public. But when senior management at the CNSC saw the inconvenient results, they prevented its release. They instructed staff to produce a new report looking at only a much smaller accident. We've filed this procedural request today because the CNSC needs to be accountable to Canadians, not the nuclear industry. As Ms. McClenaghan will discuss, this information must be released to ensure public safety in the Greater Toronto Area, and it should happen this fall. And finally, Dr. Edwards will discuss how this report's suppression is but a symptom of how the CNSC has been transformed into an industry cheerleader since Prime Minister Harper fired the Commission's former president, Linda Keane, in 2008. I'd now like to pass the mic to Ms. McClenaghan.
The Canadian Environmental Law Association has intervened at several Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission hearings on the question of the adequacy of nuclear safety regulation and emergency planning. Some potential accidents at CANDU nuclear plants could have very severe consequences with risks to people, environment, and property. So the nuclear safety regulator should be insisting that large potential accidents with radioactivity releases have excellent emergency planning in place. In their safety hearings, how could the safety regulator judge whether emergency planning preparedness is excellent? To do this, the regulator and the public need very clear and very reliable information about certain questions. Some of those questions include, what types of radioactivity could escape from the nuclear plant in an accident? How much radioactivity could escape in a very bad accident? How quickly could it escape? How much time would there be to take protective actions and to alert people about what to do? The answers to these and other questions should dictate what emergency plan the province and Durham region have in place. For example, how many people might have to evacuate? How far away and to where, and for how long might they have to stay away? Are the existing evacuation plans workable in a fast enough time frame to respond to a really bad accident? Have enough people been given potassium iodide in advance? What Chernobyl in 1986 and Fukushima in 2011 tragically taught us is that very severe accidents with extensive releases of radioactivity can happen at any nuclear plant. It's a mistake to rely on hope that these accidents won't happen or that they would be limited in size in Ontario. That type of mistake could mean that people who could have been protected might be exposed to extra radioactivity in an accident. As a result, the safety regulator's job is to take a very hard line on public protection in advance of any accidents. The CNSC heard hundreds of people tell them so at environmental hearings on the Darlington and Pickering nuclear plants in 2012, 2013, and 2014, and at the Bruce plant in 2015. The CNSC commissioners seemed to heed this expectation in the 2012 Darlington hearings and called for a severe accident study that could be used to judge the adequacy of emergency planning. The commission panel members and staff repeatedly told the public that this information would be brought to the Darlington plant licensing hearing that starts today. OPG wants a 13-year license to refurbish 4 plants in one of the most populous parts of North America. The panel members sitting today will not be able to judge whether emergency planning is good enough to protect the public around Darlington in case of an accident if they don't have information about the consequences of a Fukushima-level accident. As commissioners, they deserve no less than a complete answer to their 2012 questions of their staff. The public deserves this too. Commissioners depend on this information to do their jobs, and the full information could save lives in the, we hope never to be faced, but quite possible event of a very severe accident. What we have to remember is that the Darlington plant is located within the Greater Toronto Area region with millions of Ontario homes and workplaces. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Edwards now.
Thank you. Yes, the problem of preparing for nuclear emergencies is very important. We have seen how nuclear power can behave very badly and endanger large populations and make certain areas, extensive areas, uninhabitable for a considerable period of time. At both Chernobyl in the Ukraine and Fukushima in Japan, there are hundreds of thousands of people who will never be able to return home again, perhaps in their lifetime, certainly not in the foreseeable future. Now, the nuclear industry and the nuclear regulatory have shoulder to shoulder sang from the same hymn book in saying that these accidents are so improbable that we need not consider them. We need not look the beast in the face. At the same time, however, they require federal legislation to protect them against liability in the event of exactly such a catastrophe. So if they can take the trouble to have a law passed limiting their liability to just a pittance, a fraction of the anticipated costs of a nuclear accident, the only industry that requires that kind of protection, then why should they not confide the consequences to the public so that proper planning can be done? Here in Canada, the public has to know what the worst case scenario is so that proper emergency plans can be put in place, as we've heard. The Ontario government also has to know what the worst scenario can be so that multi-billion-dollar decisions about refurbishing the Darlington reactors can be made taken on a realistic cost versus risk basis. For example, should we be siting nuclear reactors beside such large populations? Should we be siting nuclear reactors on such important bodies of water as Lake Ontario, where, in fact, we could be endangering the drinking water of tens of millions of people on both sides of the border? The federal government also has to know, because the Harper Conservatives last year passed a law limiting the liability, as I said before, that law leaves Canadians on the hook for tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in liability in the event of such an accident. Does anybody have a handle on what those figures should be? By suppressing this study, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has violated its own prime directive, which is laid down in law. Its job is to serve the public interest, not to protect the industry from adverse publicity. The CNSC also has a legal obligation to provide objective scientific information about nuclear risks. Michael Binder, the chairman of the CNSC, is a Harper appointee. He was installed as chairman of the CNSC by the Harper government after Linda Keane, the previous chairman, was fired for no good reason. That shameful episode marked a transmutation of the Safety Commission from just a licensing agency for nuclear facilities to an aggressive defender and supporter of the nuclear industry, lashing out at nuclear critics publicly and circulating unabashedly one-sided pro-nuclear opinion pieces through emails. Across the cover of a CNSC annual report, Mr. Binder's team had the following words emblazoned: fact, nuclear energy is safe. Well, this is an opinion, not a fact. And when we have a regulatory agency that cannot distinguish between fact and opinion, we're in trouble. If nuclear energy is indeed safe, why waste our money by having a nuclear safety commission? It's not necessary. Obviously, this is simply a rhetorical question. After the 3 Mile Island meltdown in 1979, President Carter commissioned a study into the causes of that disaster. The principal cause, according to the presidential report, is that there was a false belief among both the workers and the managers in nuclear plants that nuclear power is inherently safe. And that's what led to the catastrophe. We have to change that attitude, said the report, to one which recognizes that nuclear power is inherently dangerous, and therefore all possible precautions must be taken. For the CNSA to be complicit in hiding the extent of the dangers from the Canadian public and from political decision makers is criminal, in my opinion. And I believe that we Canadians have to compare this with much lesser scandals, such as the scandal surrounding Mr. Duffy, where there is a public story fabricated to mislead the public into thinking that what's really going on is not being divulged. Whereas in this case, we have a much more serious issue. The publication of the report in June of 2014, deleting the most significant radiation releases that one can anticipate, is simply providing a cover story, and it's misleading the public into believing that the worst case accident is in fact nothing to be afraid of. This is not doing their job. So the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility is very happy and proud to be a part of this request to make sure that this suppressed report is released. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's any questions, we're happy to take them en anglais ou en français. If no, thank you very much.